The World Economic Forum's war on cars has begun, and we all know that the cost of running a car has already gone through the roof. And they're also trying to make it even more inconvenient besides the cost. You may also, of course, remember the infamous World Economic Forum sponsored Forbes article. Either way, I'm going to read the relevant passage from it. So this is the article itself. Welcome to 2030, I own nothing, have no privacy, and life has never been better, which is already a terrifying title in and of itself.
I remember this article.
Yes, it's difficult to forget it, isn't it? So I'm going to just read a couple of extracts from it that are important to this particular topic. So, welcome to the year 2030. Welcome to my city, or should I say, our city. I don't own anything. I don't own a car. I don't own a house. I don't own any appliances or any clothes.
Somehow you're supposed to believe that I'm happy about this.
Yeah. When clean energy became free, things started to move quickly. Transportation dropped dramatically in price. It made no sense for us to own cars anymore because we could all call a driverless vehicle or a flying car for longer journeys within minutes. We started transporting ourselves in a much more organised and coordinated way when public transport became easier, quicker and more convenient than the car. Now I can hardly believe that we accepted congestion and traffic jams, not to mention the air pollution and combustion engines. What were we thinking?
As a driver, I don't accept congestion and traffic jams. I deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
I deal with it. But it's interesting, the framing of all of this is under the kind of homo economicus assumption that the second people are presented with a more convenient option, a more efficient option, they'll just automatically go along with it. This fantasy world where, oh, I don't have to own a car, then I won't. No, people want to own things. People want to have a space that they own. They want things that help them to feel as though they belong.
I think what they're missing out on is that anyone who's used public transport knows that people on public transport are normally disgusting. And I want to be as far away from them as possible because they have no manners or concept of hygiene.
And footage coming from New York, for instance, really makes me want to avoid all public transport because it seems that it's kind of runs as a underground fighting ring as well in some communities.
Just a revolving fight club, pretty much.
There you go. You've got a new challenger at every stop.
This is just making me want to use it now.
Well, there you go. If you're ever feeling bored or a bit riled up, you know, just head over to London, get the tube for a few stops. I'm sure you'll get into a few fights.
Or get stabbed. But
probably that.
So yeah, it's obviously quite clear here that their agenda is to eliminate car ownership, isn't it? That's pretty explicit. I mean, this is World Economic Forum sponsored article. It's just their agenda nakedly. But you might ask, well, how are they going to do this? And that is, to my knowledge, through a network of pressure groups who they can either directly fund or give guidance to or increase the notoriety of by raising their profile. And it is also entirely possible as well that they're doing the bidding of the World Economic Forum without even realising it, which I think happens quite a lot. Where the ideology gets passed on to them, but they don't realise the source, and therefore they parrot these ideas.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll get to it later on, but the sorts of organisations like the grassroots activists who go around London slashing people's tyres because they don't like the cars that these people are driving, it's awful news. The only counteraction that you can really say to that, and I'm not encouraging this, I'm just saying that this would be the logical counteraction, would be to go around slashing the cars of all electric vehicles around London, just to be like, well, how do you like it then? That's not a suggestion.
It's such an infantile way of approaching things. I mean, I've seen some pretty offensive clothing. It doesn't mean I, slash it off and get rid of it.
You would
leave
if you
them
got
naked.
the opportunity, though.
No, I wouldn't. I believe in propriety and decency, thank you very much.
Oh, that's fair, okay.
But yes, I'll be focusing on the UK in particular here because it's the country, funnily enough, that I know the most about. And it's also worth noting, particularly in the UK, that lots of towns and cities have introduced these new measures within the past month or so, all at the same time, which kind of indicates some sort of coordinated effort, doesn't it? And it's also worth mentioning that I think that this blueprint that's being employed in the UK is also going on in Europe and North America as well. At least those are the areas in which I was able to find other examples of this, which I simply don't have the time to go through. But there's no reason to think that what's going on here in the UK isn't happening elsewhere right now. And actually, I would really like to hear from you in the comments about any examples of this that you have found in your own countries.
Not just action taken against cars as well. As I would suggest that any sort of action that seems to be taken against ease of movement, because that's what this all seems to be come down to. That's the fundamental reason that they're doing it. They don't want you to be able to have easy access to making your own decisions in any way, and that includes where you go and what you do there.
Fortunately, Daddy Government has to make all the decisions for you. And I loathe that term as well. So I'm sorry about that. So I want to look at this article from Net Zero Watch titled "The Lobbyist War on Motorists." And this is a recent article. Oh, no, it's not. It's from March, but it's this year at the very least. And they're saying...
Connor Tomlinson? Sounds like a bell end.
yeah, whoever that guy is. No, this is actually a good article from our very own Connor that he forwarded on to me. And I'm going to read some of what he said. So, recent changes to the highway code introduced a hierarchy of road users which gives pedestrians and cyclists the right of way over vehicles, which is already moronic. Cyclists can now ride two abreast and in the centre of the road, making it impossible for vehicles to overtake in many situations.
Oh, I'm getting triggered just by the idea of that. I've been in that situation so many times.
Cyclists in the middle of the road, it's a good way of getting someone to ram into you out of pure rage.
Becoming the most hated person in town.
It is just inconsiderate, isn't it?
Yeah, even when I was cycling, I would, even though it's technically illegal, if the pavement was completely clear and empty, I would go on there to get out of the way of cars. If the pavement was not clear, I would almost make it a challenge to myself to try and ride between the yellow lines of the double yellows at the side of the road, because that way I knew I was completely out of the way. Exactly.
That's the way a considerate cyclist cycles. And I have nothing against cyclists who are responsible.
Or here's an idea, cyclists. If there's a cycle lane, cycle in it.
No way. That's
they don't.
Revolutionary idea.
Don't.
You're turning into Jeremy Clarkson now, aren't you?
I really am. The temptation, I swear, when you're going past an inconsiderate cyclist, just open the door on them.
It would be quite comedic just to pop open the door.
Just
No, definitely don't do that, please don't. So it carries on to say, a closed group of cyclic and pedestrian organisations contributed to the consultation period, with over 3/4 organised by pro-cycling lobby groups. These anti-car activists claim that these changes will lower congestion and emissions, benefiting public health, the economy and the environment. But critics state it will cause avoidable collisions, which is obvious. It is clear that the policy change is not based on common sense or safety, but an ideological desire to inconvenience motorists off the road. From high petrol prices to increasingly complicated road rules, utilitarian environmentalists are waging war on privately owned transport. The Car Free Cities campaign endorses taking space away from cars to encourage walking and cycling. Increasing journey times by increasing traffic will inconvenience people till they choose to walk instead. Critics point out their punitive plan is self-defeating, increasing congestion and thereby exhaust fumes on routes outside
ultra-low emission zones.
That's the one.
I've run a crapper of them when I've gone to London, driven to London. Never do it. Never again.
And car-free zones. But at the heart of activism like this is that members of these lobby groups believe their grand goals of abolishing transport emissions immediately take precedence over your free choice and lifestyle. This looks disturbingly like an attempt to socially engineer your hands off the wheel, which I wholeheartedly agree with. So yes, it's also worth mentioning, do you know who's not being influenced by shadowy globalist forces to abolish cars? Well, Napoleon, of course. So here we have an Epochs, which is Beau's series on the website, our history series, where he's talking about the life of Napoleon, and this is the first part, and this will be free on the website for a week, so make sure to check it out within that week window, because it will go back behind a paywall again, and Beau's work is always very good, and I always enjoy featuring in some of the history videos, so definitely check it out. So back to cars again. This next story is horrifying, and the fact that it's been so understated is quite something, really. So Canterbury City Council traffic ban moves step forward despite opposition. And this is from their local Kent Online news outlet. So this was released this week, in fact. A controversial bid to stop people travelling between neighbourhoods has been branded a draconian ban on free movement as the plan goes out to consultation. Canterbury City Council unveiled its radical vision for the district last week, with it proposing to divide the city up into 5 areas and build 13,000 extra properties by 2045. So they're basically turning it into districts akin to the Hunger Games here, where you're not allowed to leave your district, otherwise you will face a fine. So I'll read exactly what the article says. Under the proposals, motorists will be unable to make simple journeys between the zones and will face fines enforced using number plate recognition cameras if they break the rules, which is just horrifying. It's not even a massive city like London where...
This is totalitarian.
Yeah, I mean, even the Chinese don't do this. They will instead have to drive onto a new bypass, essentially a much larger outer ring road, before re-entering their chosen neighbourhood. But during a meeting of the authority's cabinet yesterday, Lib Dem councillor Nick Eden Green argued, "We have a bypass where the route hasn't been finalised and we have no real idea of what it's going to cost, around about 100 million probably," which is ridiculous money for what they're
for something
doing.
That's completely pointless
Yeah.
and is already solved by the fact that there are already roads between each of these districts. And the prevailing logic is absolutely ridiculous as well, which is we're going to make it so that instead of driving in the town or the city,
You've got to drive around.
You've got to
the
drive
edge,
around it.
because
So-
that's convenient. That's going to help emissions, isn't it?
Yeah, because it's just saying, oh, as long as the emissions don't take place directly within the city, who cares? It's ridiculous.
It carries. Eden Green carries on to say, "The government certainly is not going to stump up the money, and we can't either." And the article carries on. The project, which is a part of the council's draft local plan, will meet direct trips to supermarkets, retail parks, or GP surgeries. Those will be prohibited in a bid to encourage walking, cycling, and public transport use. So if you want to go to the doctor, you can't even avoid a fine if you're going across to another district. Minor roads and rat runs linking each of the zones will be closed, with drivers forced to either ditch their cars or use the bypass to dip in and out of these 5 neighbourhoods. Labour leader Councillor Dave Wilson was also concerned about how the road building would be funded, as there are no guarantees of the estimated costs of the Eastern Bypass being accurate because of the route is unclear. "We are concerned about how some of the proposed major road building is to be funded and yet more borrowing to plug the gap until developers have met their housing targets." He added, "The risk attached to the approach should not be acceptable. We need incentives to help people change how they travel, not a draconian ban on free movement, which could not be more contrary to the British way of life."
Holy crap, that all came from the Labour
Yes.
councillor.
And can you guess whose idea this is?
Well, that's the funny thing. I've just looked into it, that the Canterbury Council is massively weighted in favour of 75 Conservative councillors to 31 Labour councillors.
That's right, it's the Conservatives. Yes. So where is it?
You've
However,
got
Councillor...
Labour councillor arguing in favour of fiscal responsibility against the
and the
Conservatives.
British way of life and freedom from government interference.
Bloody hell.
He's in the wrong party, I think.
It sounds like they've flipped.
However, Council Leader Ben Fitter-Harding spoke of the necessity of the plan, which has been modelled on a system used in the Belgian city of Ghent. "It has always been worth remembering that doing nothing is not an option," the senior Conservative explained.
Yes,
"The
it
road
is.
changes will not happen tomorrow, and nor would we want them to. They are about 15 to 20 years in the making."
Doing nothing is an option. In fact, most politics would go far more smoothly if most politicians either didn't exist or did nothing. It's that simple. Just let people get on with it.
So it's not just Canterbury, also Oxford as well. 6 new Oxford traffic filters would see private cars banned from roads. So this was released last month and reads, "Cars could be banned from 6 Oxford roads as part of a plan to introduce 6 new traffic filters into the city. Under the proposals, drivers would need a permit to take private vehicles down 6 streets. So you need a licence to go down a road.
We need to be charging so many people with treason.
Yes. Permits would be available for blue badge holders, health workers and professionals, and non-professional care workers. All other vehicles, including buses, coaches, taxis, vans and mopeds and Heavy goods vehicles will be allowed at all times. So basically only private cars. So this is just a war on normal people, normal working people, and the people who are acceptable to the regime get to use these roads like normal.
And to be fair, Oxford is a horrible town to drive through anyway. Lovely town to
Never
visit.
driven there, no.
Yeah, it's best. They've got bus stations and stuff outside the city that it's best to park up at.
And talking of other prominent university towns, Cambridge. So here is an article from the Daily Mail. Outcries £5 fee to drive in Cambridge as motorists slam draconian congestion charges. This came out this week as well, so it is all at the same time.
It is.
It is known as the cycling capital of the UK, but motorists in Cambridge are rebelling against the draconian congestion charge that they say is a step too far in favour of the cycling lobby. The Greater Cambridge Partnership, or GCP, wants to introduce a £5 charge for any weekday journeys to and from within a zone that covers virtually the entire city. So if you want to drive in Cambridge, you have to pay money on top of the running costs of your car, which are already extortionately high, which is just unacceptable in my opinion. Like, why are they trying to socially engineer what people do? Why can't they just leave people to make their own decisions?
Well, because social engineering gives them power.
They say, and I'm reading from the article here, opponents say the potential £1,300 annual cost per car is unaffordable when there is a cost of living crisis. At least there are some reasonable people involved in this. Like, obviously it's unaffordable. Are you insane?
That's the worry that I have, which is if they actually try and carry on with this, because these are only the first small steps. Well, they're not even first small steps. We're kind of in the middle process of this transition that the elites are trying to force us into. If it carries on like this, the more draconian these charges get, the more likely it will be that there will be actual protests against this. Probably outside of Downing Street in Parliament and outside of the local councillors. And I don't think people are going to take this lying down.
No, I hope not anyway. So that's not all from Cambridge either. So here's another article from this month. New scheme could see traffic banned on Cambridge Road. This is a different thing. Excuse me. Traffic could be banned on a Cambridge Road as a new modal filter is due to be installed. The scheme is part of the council's programme to increase active travel in Cambridgeshire. A pair of wooden planters and a central bollard will stop cars and vans, but allow cyclists, pedestrians and mobility scooters to pass freely. This will also stop cars whizzing around the corner at some streets that supposedly will make the road safer. So yes, they're going to also block cars out and put some plants in there to get in the way, which is
Great.
something
Target practice.
So even very small towns are not free from this. Towns that you would imagine do not require this sort of rule in the first place. So here's a small town in Gloucestershire, Thornbury, which I believe has a population of about 12,000, if Wikipedia is correct. So apparently it says here that they banned travel down the main high street in cars in COVID times, and they've just kept the ban. And they're talking about keeping it permanently now. So just using the emergency COVID powers to enact a ban. And they cite here that every single person in the community who has written about this issue to the council has written in defiance of it, saying it's a terrible idea. And apparently the council are just going to go ahead with it against the entire community's wishes. Like, no one wants this.
Do you feel represented yet?
Well, I mean, I don't live there, but I'm sure that they don't.
The people who live there.
Right. Well, I imagine they probably don't.
No.
So there's also an example here from Glasgow as well. So they're talking about introducing a traffic ban in George Square, to pedestrianise it. So if you scroll down, John, so just so we can see what it looks like, it does seem to be like a hub in the centre of Glasgow. So I can understand just having some small areas where pedestrians can go and, say, have their lunch in a city centre. So I wanted to include something that isn't necessarily as nefarious as the rest. And this actually was put to a vote in the community as well, which Glaswegians actually voted in favour of banning traffic in that central city centre area.
I'm not entirely against the idea of creating traffic-free zones in certain cities and towns, but like you say, these blanket bans across certain towns, these very, very restrictive fines and charges that you get. If it's literally just we just want this area to be somewhere where pedestrians don't have to worry about the noise that traffic generates and the smells that it generates as well. They can just relax. That's fine. It's all the other stuff is much more nefarious.
So apparently 2/3 of the respondents to the survey were in favour. So
Exactly.
it's a pretty unanimous result for them. And I've included this because, of course, we can't just say every attempt to restrict cars is
Automatically evil.
yes. So I wanted to add a little bit of nuance to it, but nevertheless, there is this terrifying push within the past couple of months to completely disincentivize motorists from using their cars entirely, as if the cost of it wasn't already bad enough. And I personally think that this has clear links to the World Economic Forum through them funding these lobbying groups who then push for these sorts of things. And the best thing to do is be as loud as possible to say, yes, I don't support this, down with the cyclists, down with the pedestrians, long live cars.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content we have on site, such as the Contemplation series, the most recent episode on Is the Left Really More Creative? If you'd like to follow what else Josh is putting out, you can follow him on Getter at Josh_firm on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.